Hey, here I am this morning in the back shed, and it is going to be a fun day as I welcome Dan Palmer into the shed. It's episode number 104. Today is Monday, April 25th, 2022. Welcome. All right, Dan Palmer, here you are. This is fun.
Good to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me, Cliff. This is incredible.
You know, I've been trying to do this for a long time.
Well, I've been following you around at all your stops. Went to your hometown. Followed you to Biola because all my friends were there. Followed you to Hume Lake, and now you followed me to my town.
I followed you to Sac, and here we are. Dan is the executive director of Youth for Christ of Sacramento. Is that the right way to introduce you?
That is perfect.
And more important than that, a longtime friend. That's what I love, and I love how I get to introduce you that way, Dan. So I was just going back into the annals of Sunrise Community Church, and you preached for us right around this time back in 2017, when our
right before COVID,
definitely before COVID. And but you came and preached for us, and I'll never forget, because everyone's like, we like that guy, how do we get him?
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's no way you can get him.
That was a great experience for me, to be inside that church. I grew up in this area my whole life, so I just had always heard about your church over and over again through the years. And even when I was youth pastoring after I was a student, when I graduated college, I was youth pastoring there. I'd hear about it over and over again. So to be able to go there and share with the people, I absolutely love that. It was a blast.
Oh, it was fun to have you. And you jumped in at a very important time, because it was really crazy. Our senior pastor had a skiing accident and was down for the count for about a month and a half. And suddenly we just had to jump in and fill spaces and get people in the pulpit. I was so grateful, because I think you agreed to come in at about a 2 weeks notice. And
yeah. But, in youth ministry, that's actually a lot of notice. It's normally the night before. So I appreciate it. I was like, this church is on top of
it. Thank you very much. Well, so let's go backwards. There are so many things, Dan. I feel like you have this just wealth of ministry experience, let's go the other direction, because you and I met when you were what we used to call an intern in a church back in Bakersfield, which meant we can pay someone hardly anything to come do all the work in the youth department.
Yeah, you live with Widow Harris. They give you a car that's broken down on someone, and they pay you a little stipend to get some food, and you're off and running, doing ministry 100 hours a week. Yeah.
But we had heard about you, and we had been recommended, as this was my little tiny Mennonite Brethren home church in Bakersfield. But we had heard about you through Ray Johnston, and he had recommended you to come do that. And then years later, you're a famous guy. So how did we get from there to where we are today?
That's funny. I did not know that Ray was the one who recommended me there. I know he got me started on camp speaking, which I got to share those experiences at Hume with you. But Ray was so good to me, and I just want to say thank you, since you brought that up. There's people that are ahead of us in ministry that open doors for us that we can never open, and really it's God opening those doors. And so a lot of my experiences, you ever seen that movie Yes Man, where Jim Carrey says, I'm going to say yes to everything so that I can live life? I feel like I'm that kind of a person, where it's like, okay, God, what do you want me to do? So I have had a wide array of experiences, but a big part of it is just saying yes. And when I felt my call to ministry, I was in high school. I was the rally commissioner at Cordova High School, my junior and senior year of high school.
Of course you were.
Training.
That does not surprise me at all.
Perfect training for a youth pastor.
You were the guy in high school that I was so intimidated by. I'm like, I could never be that guy.
Yeah, so I was literally in student government, and I'd always bring my Bible, because if you're the rally commissioner, you've got a couple rallies a year. The rest of the time, you got nothing to do. So I had my Bible out, and I came across Mark 14, the story where the woman takes the flask of expensive perfume and anoints Jesus for his burial. She's the only one that's been Yeah, the nard. Yeah,
The
whatever that
nard.
is. She's the only one that believed him. And she broke it and poured it out. And you remember the disciples rebuke her. They're angry that you could have taken that and, used it on the poor. And Jesus affirms her and says, no, she's done a beautiful thing. She no money for burial. And I remember sitting there as a 11th grade Dan Palmer reading this passage in Mark 14 and going, I agree with the disciples. This is a waste. This makes no sense to me. And literally in that class, the next section of Mark 14 is communion. And Jesus says, this is my body broken. This is my blood. Just like what she did. She broke it and poured it out. Everyone said, what a waste. And Jesus said, that's a beautiful thing. And then Jesus says, this my, he raised Lazarus from the dead and now he's dying. He could have done so much more with his life. And yet God's saying, this is a beautiful thing. And in that moment, that was my call. God's like, if I want to break you and pour you out, and the world says it's a waste, are you listening for my voice to say it's a beautiful thing?
Wow.
And that was my calling. And so can I share 2 pledges I made that day?
Yeah, please.
For ministry. And this is the answer to your question of why I've have this wealth of stuff, because I say yes to stuff. But I told God in that moment, my dad had left when I was 6, and I was very insecure about growing up fatherless. And my dad also, we were heavily involved in First Covenant Church, and he made some horrible decisions that I was ashamed of as a young kid. And you grow up with that shame that it's on you. And I wanted to prove people wrong. I felt I was judged by what he did. And so I wanted to make it. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to, build a business or make a bunch of money so I could show everyone that I had what it takes. And so that call to me was forget that revenge motivation, that getting rid of your shame with success, and listen for my voice to say it's a beautiful thing. And so I said, God, if this is really you, I'm 17 years old. If you're calling me into ministry, first of all, I'm not going to kick any doors down. You're going to have to open the door. If you're sovereign, you can open the door for me to show up somewhere. And so you're going to have to do it, not my personality. So my entire ministry career, I've never sent out a resume, never applied for a job, never, because of that pledge. And then the second thing I told him, if you open the door, this is my second thing. If you open the door, God, I will walk through it, even if it's totally beyond me. Even if I'm so scared, if I'm so intimidated, if you open the door, I'll step through it, trusting that you're going to lead me. And that was my call to ministry. And so I said yes to all these things that are intimidating. And it's been incredible.
That is so cool, because, from a distance, I've watched so many of these things that you've gotten to be a part of over the years. And you see where God's hand has just blessed that endeavor. And it's not because it's not because you have these just amazing people, but God's just going, I'm going to put my blessing there, and I'm going to take Dan and Clark and, these different people. So
yeah,
that totally takes me to Celebration. Like, we were talking right before we went live here that you got to be a part of Celebration back when it was first Cove down there. And in being up at Hume Lake, I kept hearing about this major event that was taking place, I think, on a Sunday night.
Yeah, Sunday night at 8:00.
That was just drawing in students from all over Sacramento, and was just exploding. And you were a big part of that, right?
Yeah, I didn't start it. Clark Creepar did at
Biola,
Clark. Right, Clark and Larry, who went to my church also, who played the guitar for Clark for Singspiration.
Was that Larry Hansen?
Larry Hansen. Yeah.
No way.
So,
we went to college together.
I know that's where Celebration started. And
okay.
So you were there at the beginning, and we hired Clark out of Biola to be the college pastor, and he brought this Singspiration idea from Biola to our church.
And it's so funny.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it grew slowly at first, and I went to it. So, you guys are older than me, even though I look older than you. I'm not aging.
Yeah, right? I'm older than you.
But, I got to experience it. Then I became a youth pastor. And even though it was college and no high schools were allowed, I would bring like 50 kids from my youth group every Sunday night, because it was powerful. And then after seminary, Pastor Ted called me and said, hey, Clark's moving on. Like, you're the person I want to take over. And they had just moved into the new building. So it went from 400 to like 1,200 in a short period of time. And I got to be there for that experience. And it was just an incredible night. It was all based on worship and the word and prayer for the nations. And so I would do like a 15-minute talk, which,
Mm-hmm.
giving me 15 minutes is like giving Jesus two disciples. So I'm sure I went over many times, but and then at the end, that was at the beginning, and then at the end we would highlight a missions area around the world, and
Uh-huh.
people right where they were sitting would pray. And having 1,200 young people in a
Oh my
room,
goodness.
we would say you can fly solo if you're uncomfortable, or you can turn to your neighbor and you can pray, but pray for this missionary, pray for this area of the world. And we would give them a couple minutes, and just the voices would just rise up as everyone in the room is praying. And then we enter back into into worship. And it was just powerful. And it was the strangest thing, because it ignited people's hearts for mission. Like,
Yeah.
glorifying God and lifting him up made people want to share. And I went to Papua New Guinea, I went to Africa, I went to Sao Paulo, Brazil. And every time I went there, I'd run into people that were like, oh, you're leading Celebration. Like, I came here from Celebration. And so I kept running in these random places, people who had been at Celebration who were motivated to go to the mission field because of the worship.
That's just nuts. Like it's hard to even fathom something like that, and like so many people just being prompted by the leading of the Lord. You just started dumping all kinds of names and places that are favorites of mine there. So
It's awesome. Mine
well,
too.
Clark and I he was in seminary at Talbot, I think, at the time. I was at Biola, and so we were in the same dorm. And in the 8 years that I've lived here, we've been trying to get together and have yet to get together.
Hey, he's still a pastor in the city, so no.
He's
stories.
over in Folsom. He's like right down the street.
Yeah. No stories on this podcast. We can't out Clark.
I'll behave. Okay. So when you came and spoke for us in 2017 at Sunrise, I believe you were a pastor there at River City.
Yeah.
At the time, I might be getting my timeline wrong, but shortly after that, you said, "Hey, let's talk. Things are getting ready to change." So, what got you from you ended up stepping into a pastoral position there at River City, and then
that's my home church.
Yep.
And they say a prophet's not accepted in their hometown. So it's pretty special when your church lets you come back, and I'm preaching on a Sunday and I'm like, hey, you were my Sunday school teacher. You wouldn't let me date your daughter. You like, these are the people that I'm preaching to. So I feel so lucky to be able to be a participant in my home church, River City Christian, which is the new name. It used to be First Cub. But I had been there that's where I led Celebration. And then God brought me back as the executive teaching pastor with Jesse Smith, who's one of my best friends.
So help me there.
We get to do ministry together.
So Jesse's dad was the pastor there for years, right?
Yeah, for 30 years. Yeah.
Okay. Since
he was my pastor.
I'm an out of towner here, so I got to get all this right.
Pastor Ted was a Youth for Christ guy, so I'm reverse engineering his career path here. He was a Youth for Christ guy, and we lost our pastor, and he stepped into the pulpit, and then we just never let him go. And then for 30 years, he was with us. And so that's a weird story, because that's my home church. That's my dream job, being at the church. And we got really healthy, and the church was just doing incredible. And I started feeling like, is it a good use of the resource of God for Jesse and I both to be here? Because in the beginning, doing a transition from a 30-year tenure of a pastor is a hard transition. We got to a healthy place.
We know that.
Yeah, you went through it. And so we felt like we got to a healthy place. And so it's like, what do I do? And so, once again, back to my calling. And this is what God always seems to do. I'm preaching. I always preach all of July in the church. Even to this day, I still do, even though I joined YFC. I told Jesse, I'm still going to be at the church. I still want to preach. But cool. I'm also going to do this other ministry. He said yes. So it's a win-win. But I preach in July, and it was actually in July, and I was in the office, and I was preaching on Abraham. It was an Old Testament series we were in. I was teaching on Abraham, leave your father and mother and go to the land I will show you, that. And I'm thinking about that. I get a call. It's from a local church in town saying, "Hey, we want you to be our senior pastor." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's interesting." 15 minutes later, I get another. This is the same morning,
Uh-huh.
10 o'clock and 10:15. And YFC calls, and the previous executive director, who was amazing, had
Right.
gotten cancer and passed
Yeah.
away. And so they were desperate for leadership. So 15 minutes later, I get this other call. "Hey, we want you to come be the executive director of Youth for Christ." And I'm like, "This is weird. I'm not even looking. Like, I haven't applied. My name's not
Right.
out there. I'm at my home church." They're like, "This is so weird." And I'm talking about Abraham leaving, leaving his father and mother and going to the land. And so I felt like the stirring in me. And I just felt like if I went and senior pastor to church, that would be an ego move right now, because I'm at my
Mm.
home church and I'm not the senior pastor, but I've grown up here my whole life and I'm with my best friend, and there's respect and trust with the church. And I don't need the title. If I was going to be at a church, I'd be here. And that's what led me to go to Youth for
That's
Christ, which
interesting.
seemed like the less likely choice, because that's a fundraising position. I had no experience. It's a nonprofit where I had no experience in any of that stuff, but that's how God turned my heart to say, "Hey, this is the next step."
But it
That I have.
totally goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about how just your entire life of being a series of saying yes along the way, as God's opening up those doors. And I had one of those moments in 97. I think within a matter of a month, I got offered 3 different ministry positions when I was working in the secular world. I went, "Okay, God, you're obviously calling me towards
The
this."
ministry. Yeah.
Right.
So glad you said yes, Cliff.
Oh
That would have been
man.
tragedy.
Uh
We need you in the church.
well, let's talk YFC for a second. And actually,
Yeah.
as we get into that, I do want to acknowledge some of our regulars that are joining us today. Trudy, good to see you. Barb, joining us from Cleveland, Ohio. It's always wonder. I think you're in Cleveland, somewhere near Cleveland. That's my guess. D. Kurtz, Valerie Connor, Micah Paul, my friends. Good to see you all. Micah, thank you so much for jumping in our tech ministry. It's been good. Okay, so here, Rob Maxey was just in so many ways a hero of the faith. And I mean, the guy was legendary. And I remember the moment I got to Sacramento, people started telling me stories about him and what he was doing at YFC. Just a sad story, losing him to cancer. And just, that was a big deal. How, boy, yeah. Micah, miss Rob, but glad to hear how God has filled that position. So, again, people knew Rob, and God had just, there was a great legacy of God using him and working in that position. How do you come in behind Rob Maxey, and what's going on? And we'll talk some Julie Habib here in a second too, because she's
Oh yeah.
one of our that came out at Sunrise.
Yeah. First of all, like in ministry, it's really important for all of us to put our ego aside. And it's hard because we're human,
Yeah.
and we're proud, and we have our areas of arrogance, and we want things to be about us. But when you follow someone like Rob, who, I mean, he's a legend. Do you know how intimidating it is when you leave the church, which is where you're comfortable, because you want to see lost kids come to know Jesus. And so you step out of your comfort zone into this completely different world. And I had no idea if I was going to be good or not. I never tried to raise funds for it. I mean, we have 3 teen centers. Our budget's like $2.5 million a year. It's not a small fundraiser. Right. I stepped into this huge, like, with no experience, and you sit down with person after person, and my thought is like, I hope these people are going to continue to support our work. That's what I'm thinking. And 5 minutes into the conversation, their eyes are filled with tears, and they're going, "I miss Rob." And I'm like, wow, where do I go from here?
Right.
Like this, but it was so inspiring. And that's what Rob did this job. But more than doing the job, he shared his life. And I know what Paul said. We didn't just share the gospel; we shared our lives with you as well. And I can't tell you how many people I've sat down with, and their eyes well up with tears, and they say, "I miss Rob." They loved him; he loved them, and there's moments when you follow someone like that, you're like, I'm going to be the sacrificial lamb. And
right.
So the organization's in such bad shape, like we have to accept this next guy, but people were so gracious.
Or the what they call the when you come in on the heels of that, sometimes you become the unintentional interim.
Yes,
and
it's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard, but I'm very thankful because Rob set the bar high for me. And yeah, I've been lucky. I followed Clark with Celebration, and I always make sure I give credit because it's easy for me to think of my tenure. It was a great time. It was incredible. I mean, it's probably the biggest Celebration's been because of the new building, and just the ministry was awesome. But I never get there without Clark, and I don't get where I am in YFC without Rob. And I think that's God's intention, right? That no one is sufficient on their own. We have to stand on each other's shoulders. And you just mentioned that I got the job at your church because of Ray. I didn't know that, but I know I got to speak at Hume Lake because Ray, I was a 2-month-old youth pastor after I graduated from UCLA, and I get a call. I'm in my office. I have remember those big calendars we sit on our desk?
On the desk, yeah, big old, you rip off every month.
Giant. I got that. I got nothing in it because I've never been a youth pastor before. I'm in a brand new church. I don't know anyone. I'm sitting there. I get this call, and this person's like, Dan, is there any way you can speak in August? And I'm like, I got nothing. I literally don't have a single thing on my calendar. I'm like, well, where is this camp? Catalina Island. I'm in. They're like, do you need to pray about it? Nope. I don't need to pray about it. I'm in. Like, do you need to check your calendar? No, I got nothing. And I show up there, and they're treating me like I'm like the best speaker on earth. I literally walk in, like, we can't believe we got someone of your caliber. And I'm like, what? And I literally told you, I'm like, I've never done this before. And the guy's like, you could tell he's like, uh-oh. He's like, but Ray said you were the best. And Ray's never heard me speak. And so I joke with Ray about it. Ray said, we were in the same town, and Bayside was exploding. Right. And I kept asking these parents, because Ray's a youth pastor at heart. He loves young people. And you keep asking him, like, hey, how do your kids like our youth group? And he goes, it would get super awkward. And they would go, well, our kids are actually over at Creekside with this guy, Dan Palmer. So he goes, I didn't need to hear you. I knew that you were good. All our kids are over there when we're like blowing up. So like without Ray, I never speak at Hume, which I got to speak for a decade every summer and winter. I remember one time it was Francis Chan and then me and then Brennan Manning. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm with these legends, but it's because people open those doors. And Rob, getting back to Rob, that's what Rob did for me here. He set the bar high. He built a lot of relationships that I got to benefit from. And so I came in and tried to humble myself and just go like, hey, this isn't about you. This is about the gospel. And, so, let it be about Rob for the hearts of people that are hurting, who were impacted by him, who saw his heart and his passion, his love for the kids that we try to serve. And it's not easy going to a nonprofit. The church always talks about reaching the lost, but they're lost. And you go to a camp and kids are dropping F-bombs and they're calling each other names. And I'm like, my first camp, I'm like, hey, don't talk like that. I'm like, and I'm like, I prayed that God would lead me to a place with lost kids. These are lost kids.
Right.
Reach them with the gospel. Stop trying to alter their behavior and tell them about Jesus. When they meet Jesus, their behavior will change.
Right. I mean, and it's just like the churches that get all frustrated because you have kids out in the parking lot that are smoking and cussing, and you're like, they're at church.
They're at church hearing about the Lord. And so, I'm very appreciative for Rob, but that was heartbreaking watching. And I knew Rob before I took this position, not deep like a lot of the people I've talked with, but he asked me to speak at a camp, JH Ranch in Wairika. And he was there with his boys, and I was speaking in the evenings, and he was just there with his kids because he was connected to the different youth groups. So we just hung out, talked ministry, talked life. And so it's funny following after someone like that. It's such a blessing.
Oh, man. So that's a great segue. Tell us, some people don't know about YFC or don't know what YFC does, or if you're my mindset, you go back 30 years to what I remember of YFC back when I was a young person. And so tell us where YFC
the breakaway
is
rallies.
Right, exactly.
Breakaway rally. Yeah.
Well, here, I mean, and Angie is jumping on here. She's like, hey, YFC was a part of our lives in the 80s when our sons were young. So
I
Yeah.
think Youth for Christ and Young Life, like back then, they were the youth groups because churches didn't have
Yep.
the resources or the youth pastors yet before the megachurch movement. And then when they saw the success of organizations like Youth for Christ and Young Life, churches were like, hey, can we do this for our own kids? And so you start hiring youth pastors and building youth departments, which is fantastic. But it's really changed what we do. We've been pushed. You look at the suburbs, you're like, there's so many opportunities here for kids. Like, we don't necessarily need to be here, but what about in the city where they don't have these big churches? The youth pastor is working 10 hours in the evening after working a full-time job all day. Just someone in the church that they tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you're our youth pastor now. And can we help places like that? And so we have teen centers in some of the underserved parts of the city. And that was a huge motivation for me coming, Cliff, because my background, my dad left when I was 6. My mom got married at 19. And so she was the driver's ed secretary for Elk Grove High School, the secretary for the driver's ed department. That's not a great job. We adopted three girls. And so it's my 3 brothers and my 3 sisters. And so she was a single mom with 6 kids. Working as the secretary for the driver's ed department because they had medical care. And my mom, when she adopted the kids, she said, give me the kids no one wants. And so we got 2 drug babies. And so she needed the medical care. So we were broke
I had no
back
idea.
then.
Wow.
Yeah, but our family's mixed. So my 3 sisters, I have a black sister, a Mexican sister, and an American Indian sister. And then I went to Cordova. And I always joke with people, I'm like, with all the race stuff going on, like I was a minority at Cordova. And then I went to UCLA and I was a minority there.
Yep, absolutely.
And so and my family's totally mixed. And so, and I did Young Life in LA when I was at UCLA, and I was in Culver City and our entire group was African-American. And so I just thought, who better to speak to the power of the gospel to heal racial wounds than someone who's just been inundated in a melting pot type family and experience, who grew up poor. I mean, I grew up poor. Yeah. My mom did everything. And I look back now that my wife and I both work, she's a teacher at Capital Christian and I'm doing, youth for, and we can sometimes feel like we're barely making it. And I go, how did you make it? And my mom goes, Dan, it's amazing what you can do when you have to. I just think that's so wise.
Right.
Like, when you have to, you
right.
do it. But
there's
so
some
we
resilience
reach these
right
kids, there. And I don't get my feelings hurt. At the Sayonara Center, you mentioned Julie Habib. She's our director at the Sayonara Center, which is over by Sunrise Mall. And it's considered, the mayor told me the story of that place. A 20-year-old girl said, how can I say I love these kids when I'm living in Roseville? And she moved into one of the fourplexes on the street, the most dangerous street in Citrus Heights. Yeah. And she moved in and started after school making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, giving fishy crackers and tutoring kids. And it just exploded. And finally she said, I want to meet these kids' parents. So she threw a barbecue and the police came and cordoned off the entire street when they heard about it. And the gang members went to the police. They didn't go to her. And they said, that young woman, this campus life leader for Youth for Christ, like, tell her she's safe as long as she's here. And the city said, this is such an amazing thing. It's transforming the entire street. What can we do? They talked about buying one of the fourplexes. And then they ended up just raising one to the ground and building an entire teen center that we get to operate. And it's because of the impact we made in that area where a lot of people don't want to go. And my first probably 8 times I went to the Sayonara Center, at least one kid asked if I was there to deport him. That's what you get when you enter into these ministries. But they're pushing. These kids were trying to push me away because they've been abandoned so many times. Like, we're going to test this guy. We're going to give him a hard time. We're going to put him in awkward circumstances. And if he keeps coming back and loving us, then we'll accept him. And now it's 5 years in and it's like,
you've got credibility.
You get credibility, and you also leap over the racial issues that our society focuses on, because once love comes into the equation, love and consistency wipes those things off the table.
Right. And
now there's a relationship. And so we have a teen center in West Sacramento that's really rough down there. We make a difference in the lives of those kids. I could tell you story after story that would just shock you. Do you have time for one story?
We got time. Absolutely.
Okay. So, we have to do camp. And last summer during COVID, when even a lot of churches weren't doing camp, we're like, these kids can't quarantine. We have kids that live 11 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment. And so when quarantine happened, they're walking the street. So in West Sac, we've had 8 kids connected to our center die since COVID started because of either gun violence or drugs, because they can't stay home. Like my kids have their own room, their own Chromebook, they can log on to their class, and these kids don't. And so they're just wandering the streets for 2 years, just wandering the streets. And so we wanted to do camp, and so I got ready to take these kids to camp. And of course, it's expensive to take. We took over 400 kids from Sacramento to camp last summer as a nonprofit. You know how expensive camp is.
Oh yeah,
that's a lot of money. And our kids,
I had the camera on you. I had it on you, the screen on you at that moment, but you saw like my mouth was wide open. It's a lot.
We make them pay $50 because I learned from camp ministry. Yep. They gotta have skin in the game, or they don't respect it. But most of our kids, that's the max they can pay, $50 to $75 with it. So we have to raise all the rest of it. So I get the cheapest camps I can get, and then we try to give them experiences. This is what we do with our kid. Like, how do we stretch our money to make the biggest impact? And so I'm not going to name the camp, but we got this really expensive camp that's not very nice. A really inexpensive camp that's not that nice. And we took all these kids there for camp. And I, went to the teen center where we met. All the kids congregated. We gave the rules, told them what we expected, prayed for the trip. I jumped in the vehicle that was towing the trailer with all the sleeping bags and suitcases and everything. And they stopped it in and out. I hustled down there, unloaded everything with my son, so that when they showed up, I was there to greet them, give them their cabin assignments. They could grab their luggage and go to their cabin. These cabins are literally rectangular rooms with 4 bunk beds across the wall and a walkway like that big. I mean, it's nothing. And so the whole way down, I'm telling my son, Tyler, who at this time I think was 16, I'm like, Tyler, they're so excited for camp. Did you see him at the camp meeting as we were getting ready to load up? How excited, like, they're going to be so disappointed. This camp is not nice. Like, they're going to be so let down. They're going to be so let down when they get. So I'm talking about Tyler the whole way down to camp about this. We get to the camp. The first bus shows up is from our West Sac teen center, because our leader there drives a little crazy. And so if he's watching, drive slower. So they come piling out. I take they're like, where's our cabin? I'm like, I'm going to show you. I walk over with this group of 8 boys. I open the door, and it's literally just these rickety metal bunk beds with mats like that thick. Yeah. And the first kid sticks his head in and looks, and it's just a rectangle room. There's nothing there. And he looks back at me and he goes, are you kidding me? And I'll never forget, I looked at my son, Tyler, who was standing right with me too. And I go, here it comes. I literally said, here it comes. He's going to complain. Like, This isn't what he expected. This is not nice. He goes, are you kidding me? And I looked at Tyler and I go, here it comes. He goes, are you telling me I get my own bunk? That's what he was going to say. I get my own bunk. Oh, and I go, what do you mean? He goes, I live in a room there's 5 of us, and we have 3 mattresses on the ground. And so on Monday, I get the mattress, and then Tuesday I rotate to this, and then Wednesday I'm here, and then the next 2 nights I'm on the ground, and then I rotate back on the mattress. So are you telling me for this camp, like, this bunk is mine? I don't have to rotate out of it onto the ground. And I was just like, that is not what I was expecting. But it gives you an idea of the type of kids that we reach.
Right.
And how important it is for them to have these experiences and to hear the gospel. It's really powerful.
It's huge. And one of the things that I've loved, and this is just huge props to Julie also at Sayonara, is how much you have. I think it's easy to almost want to kind of keep those kids from engaging in local churches sometimes. Just going, can our local churches handle these kinds of kids coming in?
Right.
And I've loved how over the years Julie has brought kids from Sayonara over to our Wednesday night kids clubs programs. They've got some that have been coming to youth group this year, and she hangs out outside and kind of makes sure everything's okay. But and she's always asking me, is everything going to be all right? I'm like, we love it, because our kids need to be around other kids that just haven't had that same white middle class experience of not really having need. And we've been, even my kids have been on the same Upward teams playing basketball with kids that are coming over from there. And it's just been so cool to see so many churches and organizations in the community that have been embracing this partnership with YFC and having these kids integrated in the community beyond just their little neighborhood right there.
Yeah, and thank God for your church. Anybody that's listening, I just want to say thank you for having your doors open to kids that are lost. It makes a huge difference. We're a parachurch organization,
Right.
and we talk about this all the time. We're not doing what churches do. We're not in competition with churches. We are a parachurch. We come alongside the church to accomplish goals that we mutually share. And so every one of my staff people, which I have about 28 people on my staff, each ministry has to have a church partner. And the reason is that we want to lose these kids into the church, because let's be honest, if they have a campus life, Youth for Christ was my thing from 14 until 19. That was like my life. And it was the most fun thing ever. And then they graduate high school and it's over.
Yeah.
We've done them a disservice if that's the case. But if we can meet them where they're at, on campus, at the schools, in the parks, in the community, build a relationship with them. We call them adults in Christ sharing relationships with students. That's what we call it. That's our name. So we build a Christ sharing relationship with a kid. They give their life to Christ, and we bring them to a church, and they start connecting, and we lose them. That's a win. We lose them to the church. The church takes over. There's plenty of other lost kids out there that we can go get. Let's lose the ones that come to know Christ to the local church where they can grow to maturity. They can be discipled. They can have people, I tell people, I literally just talked about this. I spoke at a seniors group last week, and I said, the thing that had the biggest impact on me is when I was in I think 8th grade, and my dad left when I was 6, and I was playing sports and I was good, and I was popular at school, and everyone thought I had it all together. But I literally was crying at night because I was so broken over what happened with my dad, and feeling abandoned by God, and feeling like God I memorized the Bible verse. I did the flannel board, Jesus. How are you letting this happen to my family? And I literally would have those conversations with God as a young person. And I got invited on a father-son camping trip with Scott Foster and his dad, and my friend
Scott.
Eric. Yeah, and Eric and his dad, because they're like, Dan doesn't have a dad in his life. We're going on this backpacking trip to the Desolation Wilderness. Why don't we invite him? And they didn't have to. They did. And I needed it. And I went with them, and it was a week-long backpacking trip, and super funny because, Scott was complaining about how heavy his pack was. And finally, one of the adults were like, let us help you. And they unpacked it. He had a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper in there. Isn't that Scott in a nutshell?
But Scott's a big guy, though. Like, he's bigger than any of the rest of us.
He's packing into Desolation Wilderness a 6-pack of Dr. Pepper. So they pulled me aside at the end of the week, and they sit me down, and I'll never forget it. They looked me in the eye and they said, hey, you're smart, and you're funny, and you're excited, and you're charismatic. Like, if you're willing to work hard, you could really do something with your life. And my response was, do you think so?
Somebody believed in you.
No adult male had ever told me that before. I'd never heard that from an adult male.
Yeah.
My mom would tell me all the time, because my mom's amazing, but I didn't have a male figure in my life. And so having an adult look me in the eyes and say, hey, you have what it takes, like, made all the difference in my life. And so I think about these kids who our society says, oh, they're a disaster, they're broken, they're lost, they're violent, they're crazy. And I'm like, they just need someone to look them in the eyes and say, you're made in the image of God, and you have what it takes. And if someone would just take the time to build a relationship and say that, they will be transformed. I believe that, and they are.
Absolutely. And what I love hearing you talk about right here, it was years ago. I used to be so frustrated with Young Life because I felt like they had a model that just centered around their clubs and never worked with the church. And they have metamorphosized, evolved into an organization that is very good these days about partnering with the church. I mean, we have a whole Young Life bunch. I call it the Young Life row that sits about 4 rows back in church, and they're all in there together every Sunday. And Wendy Gutierrez, you're awesome, Wendy, by the way, is the Young Life staff member that our church supports. And but it's been really neat to see them engage, and I love to see how YFC continues to be engaged with the local church, but even in a different way. When I was in high school, it was for programming, to create programming that churches would be a part of, and to see how much more strategic that partnership is today is super encouraging.
Well, I'm a church guy too, and that helps.
Absolutely.
I believe 100% in the local church.
Yeah.
I've worked in the church for my entire life, and so for me, I really believe that the church. When I was in the church, I was a chaplain for the El Dorado County Sheriffs for a bunch of years when I was young, youngest chaplain ever.
That's
I'd go
awesome.
there. It was hilarious. But the reason is because I got into
Yeah.
ministry because I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
see lost people come to know Jesus. But your church just kind of becomes your community, and
Right.
it's easy to go like, how many interactions have I really had with unsaved people this week? I've
Right.
kind of built the, and when you've been a pastor for 30 years, you get into that thing where you're like, everyone I'm dealing with, they're all like me.
When our kids are going to
We're a country
Christian
club.
schools, and we're, yeah, that world
Yeah.
is
So for
fairly
me, like
narrow.
joining Youth for Christ for me was just like being a sheriff chaplain. Like, hey, I said I want to be out in the world. Like, I'm going to intentionally get out in the world,
Mm.
and I'm going to get around people that don't know the Lord, and I'm going to share the hope that I have.
Yeah.
And it's fun because you see that the God of the Old and New Testament, he's still saving people. He's still transforming people. He's still doing it. And you get to watch it and see it. Same reason I loved coming to Hume. My pastor would be like, why do you go to Hume when you have kids here? I said, because I'm not going to have 400 kids
Yep.
give their life to Christ this week here at my 200 person church. But there, 400 kids are going to say yes to Jesus.
Yep.
I want to be a
Absolutely.
part of that. It fills me up for the rest of the year, and that's how I feel about Youth for Christ. All the challenges, the fundraising challenges, the relationship challenges with kids that are lost, that don't have parents engaged in their life, like, but we get to watch transformation happen on a daily basis.
Oh, Dan, that's amazing, and that's the perfect spot to kind of wrap things up here. I hate to wrap it up. I love
we're just getting started.
The comments that are coming in on Facebook are fantastic because everyone's just going, "Hey, I love this conversation. I could just sit here and listen to it for a long time." I want to go there. Let's talk finances. How can someone support YFC SAC?
You can go to YFC Ministries. That's our website, or just type in Youth for Christ Sacramento, and there'll be a donation tab. You can click on it, and there's a drop down menu. And I didn't, we've had such a great time talking. I didn't even get into all of our ministries. We do an AAU basketball league for kids in the Meadowview and Land Park areas. Kids that can't afford it. I always tell my sons who have a lot of opportunity, they criticize the first sports day. They're like, these kids don't even get training. They're not going to be any good. And I had to tell them, like, hey, sons, there's some people that have a lot of opportunity and very little ability. And there's other people that have a lot of ability and very little opportunity. Yeah. You are in the category of people with very little ability and lots of opportunity. And so they walk in, and sure enough, there's like 3, 6, 7 African-American kids doing 360 dunks. My kids are like, what? So my son actually gave one of the kids his shoes because this kid was playing in shoes that were literally falling off his feet, and he's dunking. And my kid's like, I feel bad. These are like a second pair for me. So he's like, do you want my shoes? The guy's like, yes. And he's like, those shoes have never been dunked in before. And they were, but we do that. We have our 3 teen centers. And then we have our clubs, which most people are familiar with. We do a program called Point Break, which is an anti-bullying empathy campaign where we go into a school first thing in the morning, and we're there till the final bell rings. And we talk about how can you understand each other? How can you use your words to build people up? How can you be more real so that people can see the real you and accept you? It's powerful.
Yeah. Oh man.
So there's a drop down menu on our website there. You can select anything you want to give to. If you want to give to Sayonara, where Julie is, if you want to give to Julie personally, our staff raised their own support,
right?
Which is terrifying. And it's hard to ask people, like, do you want to support me? I found that hard. And so I asked for other people. I'm like, hey, do you want to support Julie? Because let me vouch for her. She is a legend. I mean, the way she loves those kids. If you haven't seen her with those, she doesn't look anything like him. She's like over 6 foot, looks like Carrie Underwood, beautiful, blonde hair, blue-eyed woman. And yet she's with all these Black and Hispanic kids, and she is their mom, their sister, their mentor, their hero. They love her because for over a decade, she is just involved in their life. So you want to support Julie, by all means, support her. She needs it, and she's amazing.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of staff people like that are working, outside the walls of the church, kind of in obscurity, but they're change agents for the gospel. And God is using them to reach these people that he loves who truly are lost.
Amazing. I Well, let me see. Well, how do I sum this up? So if you give to Sunrise on a normal basis already, on a regular basis, we do as a church give toward Sayonara Center, and that is one of our regular giving spots. But I would sure encourage you, especially, I love that you mentioned Julie. She's a homegrown Sunrise kid. She came through our church, and mom used to work on our staff, and just an amazing family. And Palmers are always looking for support. I can say that. You don't have to.
Yeah, right.
Um,
I
but
don't like to ask for myself.
here's the thing, like God's got all the money that is ever needed, right? And we get to have the privilege of giving that way and allowing him to do his kingdom work. And so even as an executive pastor, people are like, Cliff, don't let them send money somewhere else. Like, like, go where God, do what God's leading you to do. And it's
Thank you for that.
it's a great work. It's an absolute great work. Dan, let me pray for you as we
Thank you. I
kind of close
appreciate
this
that.
off, and we'll get going. I hate to shut this down, but
It's the fastest 45 minutes
right?
to my life. That flew by. Yeah.
I love
It's
it.
great. It's really great seeing you, Cliff. Thank you for your friendship and also for your ministry in our city. Really love that you're here.
It is a joy. I mean, I gotta be honest. April and I were driving through Sacramento right after our first anniversary. So this is like 17 years ago. And we're driving through Sacramento. We actually spent the night here. And we were having this conversation of, if we didn't live at Hume Lake, where would you think we could live? And I just said Sacramento. And she's like, why? I said, because I love the churches, I love the people here and all that, and then years later it is home, and we've lived here 8 years
Yep.
now. And I love this place. I love the people here. I love the movement. I love the unity in the churches. And you were a part of just giving this area that reputation to me from a distance. And
wow, thank you. I love it here.
Yeah.
But I got to visit your town too, and I almost was there for a long time. It could have happened.
I better pray, and then we better turn off.
You better pray.
Because I could have fun with Bakersfield. But anyway, let's see. Oh, Father, you're good. It's been so fun to talk to Dan, and thank you for how you're using him and YFC. And oh Lord, we thank you for the amazing legacy that Rob Maxey left behind, and how you used him. And yet, Father, you're doing a new work, and I just pray that Dan will live in the power of your Holy Spirit, that you will continue to just move in not just him, but just everyone that's a part of that organization. And would they continue to carry on a heart for the lost, for those that are in situations that are just incredibly unfortunate. Lord, would you lift them up, and God, would they know your gospel and the freedom that comes through Jesus Christ? And we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, my friend.
Hey,
so great being with you today. Thank you for the invite.
Hey, really it is an absolute joy having you here, Dan. And it's been a great time having all of you joining us. Come back next week. I think I've been promising Dan Canoin and his new book, Useful for the Master, for several weeks now. I think we might get him next week, but don't, that's not gospel truth right there. But for now, we'll say goodbye, adios, au revoir. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.